I was born in Leavenworth, Kansas in 1952 in an Army hospital. And I told my friends in high school that I was born in Leavenworth Penitentiary and my mother was there for killing my father. And so that was a lot of fun. They'd say, well, why were you in prison? And I'd say, because a boy needs his mother. So they thought I was raised in prison with my mom. My mom was from South Missouri, around Buffalo, and her family during the Dust Bowl moved north and they settled in Kansas City. But they were raised in the Ozarks. My father was born in Kansas City on a farm, and they came from Sweden, his grandfather, and there was some tragedy in the family. The grandfather, which I guess would have been my great-grandfather, was kicked in the head by a horse and killed, and then the wife pined away because of the loss of losing her husband. So my grandfather was raised by his sister, and they owned a tobacco farm. So that was kind of cool, growing up going to a tobacco farm. I had a brother who died of testicular cancer when he was 21, and I have a sister left. When I was 3 or 4, my grandmother, my dad's family lived on the farm, and so my grandmother would save these, she called them circulars, and they were just ads, but they were always only printed on one side. So the back side was white. So she would save all of these for me and then give me pencils and crayons, and I would just draw. And from my earliest memory, she said she was going to send me to the Kansas City Art Institute. I always drew, and sometimes I drew to escape my father's meanness. So I would hang out in my room and draw. And that always gave me great comfort. I went to elementary school in California, dozens of places, and then in Kansas City in a 4-room schoolhouse. So we would move back and forth from Missouri to California, and students would say, are you coming or going? Because I would always go away but then come back. So I think we figured out we moved 30 times by the time I was a freshman in high school, and my father wanted to move back to Missouri, and my mother said, no, these kids are gonna finish high school in one house. So that's why we stayed finally in California. I started high school in 1966. I had really good art teachers. There were actually 5 art teachers when I was in high school. They had filmmaking, photography, commercial art, art 1, 2, 3, 4, sculpture. I started art school in 1970. I went to the Kansas City Art Institute. The time I went there, painting/printmaking was your degree. And I liked that degree a lot because I spent the same amount of time in painting and drawing as I did printmaking. So I think it gave us a well-rounded education. By being trained as a draftsman, a painter, a printmaker, a lithographer, I think that I walked away seeing sense out of everything. One of my favorite teachers was Wilbur Newald, and he was an exceptional colorist. We used 5 colors in white, and to this day I still paint the same way, and all of my former students still paint that way, and we do rabbit skin glue and oil primer the old-fashioned way. So thankfully I learned these things at the Art Institute. They demanded good drawing. They demanded us to draw all the time. A person who was really important in my life was Stanley Lewis, who taught drawing. He came up to my drawing one day and he wipes it out and he says, there's 2 minutes left in the pose, finish it. And so I hurriedly worked, and then when he did the critique, he said it was the best drawing I ever did. And I finally understood what they were talking about, and it just clicked. They were talking about energy of the marks. They were talking somewhat about technique and proportion, but it was mostly getting away from the idea of rendering and making things seem photographic and becoming more expressive. And I think that that was a really good experience for me because I was kind of like this uptight artist. Then another one that had the biggest impact on me was Bill McKim. And Bill McKim was a lithographer. And I didn't know Bill McKim was well known when he was my teacher because he never showed us his work. So one day about 15 years ago, I Googled his name and found his work. So I started collecting it. And I realized that he was an important lithographer in his day. He had a big impact because he was humble, and I wanted to be like that. The motto back then was sex, love, and rock and roll. Those art students lived it. Just the fact that they lived that kind of a life shocked me because I came from a Southern Baptist upbringing. When you're a kid coming from the country of 8,000 people, it was a shock. I definitely had culture shock. I think the culture shock was living that strict religious life and then going and seeing kids having sex and smoking pot and doing all the things kids do. I was a good kid, I did nothing wrong. But the minute I went to art school, I did everything illegal that I could. And it opened my mind, and it helped me realize that your parents aren't always right. In 1975, I went to the Instituto Allende in San Miguel de Allende in Guanajuato, Mexico. And one of the reasons I went there was the Chicago Art Institute and the Kansas City Art Institute had sort of this exchange program going on in the 70s. So I went to Mexico City and saw the museums and then passed through this little town called San Miguel Allende. And I was in the cafeteria having a cup of coffee, and there was only one other person in there, and it was this older man. He got up and he came over and sat down and asked me why I was there. I told him I was an art student. I was thinking about going to grad school. He looked at my slides and asked what school I went to. He said, "How would you like to be my pre-Columbian art history assistant?" And I said, "Really?" He goes, "Yeah, you'll get free tuition and you'll get $25 a month pay." That was good pay. In San Miguel Allende at the school, they had a full range of printmaking courses. I became the screen printing teacher, and of course my great love was litho. They had a lot of stones. I used a press that was 150 years old, 1847 Leipzig press from Austria, one of the original French presses that had a leather strap that pulled the bed, and it had a big wooden star wheel, and you would have to move this wheel and you'd have to use your foot to get it to go through the press bed. It was a great education. I got to live in a culture that I grew to love. I got to be a teaching assistant for something that I really fell in love with, and that's pre-Columbian art and Mayan art especially. It changed my life. I went there a boy and came back a man. As I grew older and decided to major in art, I decided I wanted to be a teacher. I got hired at Ventura College in 1982.
More at an angle like this, you're just going to have to...
I was there until 1998, and then I got hired at College of the Sequoias. So I was 16 years in Ventura College, and I've been 19 years at College of the Sequoias. So that's a total of 35 years I've been teaching. Being poor, I think, has totally helped my career as a teacher at College of the Sequoias because many of the students are economically disadvantaged. We have 70% of our students get financial aid. So I explained things like, well, I lived in my car for a semester. That was a pain in the butt, but I eventually got an apartment and got settled in. And I said, you do anything you can. So I think that the students there relate to me and I relate to them on that level. And I think when I suggest that they go to art school, I think they listen because they do figure, well, if he could do it, then I can do it.
When I graduated high school, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So luckily we had this great community college that I was able to come to and kind of figure that out.
When I first met Pete, I took a drawing class as an elective. I wasn't really an art major at the time. I just came here to the College of the Sequoias because I lived here. He would always talk about printmaking.
Next semester, I took litho, and within the first week, I was hooked.
I'm the first to go to college and to complete a degree of any sort. Not just my parents or my siblings, but our cousins and cousins' cousins, and you know, hundreds of people probably. Being
here and being with P and being with all the other instructors, I realized that I could go off to a four-year college.
I had such a hard time finding a job after grad school that I said, if I'm ever in the position of helping anybody, it'll be grad students.
He would always be saying, so are you done yet? Can you come back and teach?
Hey, are you looking for a job? We have a spot for you.
I was nervous, hoping that there was a job for me to come back to, and luckily he hired me on, and it's such an honor to come back and teach where it all began and alongside of P.
Graduate students are really excited. They want the work. They want the experience to get a full-time job. That's what's been the backbone of our department, has been the adjunct. I make sure they're treated well, because if anybody messes with them, they're gonna get it.
I didn't know if I was gonna have that chance, and I'm really glad that I'm here. And now I get to help build new students just like everybody built us.
I discovered lithography when I walked by the litho room. I smelled it, and I said, what is that smell? It smells really familiar. So I go into this room, and they say, well, this is lithography. And I saw the stones, and I said, is that what Lautrec did? And they said, yes. And I said, what's that smell? And they said, lithotine. And I said, I really like that. I think I'll take this next semester. The process intrigued me. It was very much like being an alchemist. It was like a little of this and a little of that, and I enjoyed drawing on the stone. Jean Avril, it was the first print that I fell in love with. I thought it was the most beautiful image I'd ever seen. I read biographies on Toulouse-Lautrec and really got to fall in love with his work all the way through high school, and he's still one of my favorites. I think that he did capture movement, he captured dance, he captured the essence of what Paris was like during that time. And I think the fact that he also painted lesbians, he painted poor people, he painted the common person. And I appreciated that. Especially, he came from aristocracy, so it was interesting how he would live this life of a king and then move to Montmartre and become this poor starving artist. In my lifetime, what I've seen is a lot of cruelty from different people. I think when you grow up low income, you feel like the underdog, and I think that you're always root for the underdog. And I don't have blinders on. I see these things, I need to comment on these things. 1986, Ventura County Museum called me and said that my artwork was taken down from an exhibition because it drew a lot of complaints because of the subject matter.
Peterson's works were put on exhibition for 8 weeks here at the Ventura Government Center. But county officials took the paintings down after only 3 weeks. Too many complaints, says administrative analyst Susan Van Abel. Van Abel says the paintings are just not appropriate for a government building.
The subject matter to me was about domestic violence, it was about drug abuse, it was about abortion, it was about war.
And an angry Peterson is now accusing the county of censorship.
I've never heard of this. I've read about it in history books among other artists, but I never thought it would happen to me, and I've never considered my work controversial. If my work's controversial, then life itself is controversial, and maybe life should be censored.
It was taken down. Within a few days, the protests started, and it was local artists with signs, and then every day it would gain momentum.
County Government Center. Officials called them controversial. Local artists are calling it censorship.
It's a slap in the face to the artist.
My attorney said that he would do it pro bono. We went before the Board of Supervisors. He gave a long-winded speech about artists who are censored over the years. His last sentence was, if you don't put it back up, there'll be a $2 million lawsuit for breach of contract. There was an immediate vote by the supervisors, and they voted to rehang it.
Some like it, some don't, but I think the thing that I've learned is that my artwork had more impact than I thought it did.
The first time I drew a drag queen was in San Francisco in 1973 when I was a student. And we had some drag queens on campus that I talked to, and they told me about this bar. So I went to the bar and talked to one of the drag queens, and she said, would you like to watch me get ready? This person was this meek little guy, kind of like RuPaul, but more meek. And then as the person started putting on the makeup, the more makeup that went on, the more female he became, till when he put on his wig, he was this queen. Then after the show, he goes back to the dressing room, takes off the makeup, takes off the wig, changes his clothes, and he's just Walter Mitty again. Just this very quiet, subdued little guy. One of the things that fascinates me is that they are able to change their persona and totally become somebody else. And it's real. It's not made up. It's authentic. 84 was the first death of AIDS that hit us at Ventura College, though at the time they didn't know what HIV was or that it was even AIDS. They were just dying. I got involved with AIDS care when they discovered what AIDS was, and my students had AIDS. I wanted to know as much as I could about the subject. So I joined AIDS care, became a buddy, which is you're a friend of somebody with AIDS. You go to the grocery store for them, or if you just show up when they're lonely and talk to them. Then I became the president of the board of directors. And at the time, there were no nonprofits working with people with AIDS. And I learned a whole lot about people who were preparing to die. I heard a lot of stories that would break your heart. And I felt that it was important. I felt like the content was right, and I felt like I was a man on a mission to teach people what AIDS was about, because it could be prevented, and more and more people were dying at the time. So I did AIDS work for 10 years, and then I moved to Visalia, and I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was in this new place, so I just started doing anything I wanted. I'd, draw cigarette butts if I felt like it. Now I'm drawing, again, anything I can on my iPad, and I draw my dog Alice. I drew, 50 different drawings of Pepsi cans, hundreds of cans, crushed cans. The reason I like digital art, I can draw and paint as quick as I think. I made my first mark with a mouse, and I fell in love with it. I find it to be, for me anyway, like drawing on a stone. You can layer it if you want to, just like lithography. It's just pure drawing. So I said, if they ever have something I can draw directly on, like a sheet of paper, I'm buying it. I saw an iPad ad on TV. I started drawing on it, and I still can't stop. It's the most gratifying thing that I've done in years. And it could be because it feels new to me, and it's exciting to learn how to do it. Now, there's a lot of people that don't believe in digital art. I just see it as another medium, and that's how I teach digital art. It's just like a piece of charcoal. It's just like oil paints and brushes, and just use it in the same manner. If Goya were alive, he'd be working on one of these things. Because at 83, he did the Bulls of Bordeaux, his only lithograph, and then he dies. Well, he accepted this new technology where other artists just poo-pooed the whole notion of ever even drawing on a stone. So I think it takes that kind of a spirit, that kind of curiosity, in order to keep your art going. To thrive as an artist, and by thrive I don't mean financially, I mean process-wise. The main reason I like drawing on the iPad is spontaneity. Let's take away art from the world for a day. What would that mean? Well, that would mean you wouldn't have a house because it was designed by an architect who's an artist. You wouldn't have clothes because they were drawn first and then they were designed by a designer and sewn. You'd go to a generic grocery store, there'd be no labels on the can because there's no printing, there's no lithography, there's no art. So for me, that tells me that art is the most important thing in life, because without it, you wouldn't even know what a box of Cheerios looks like. You would be surprised. You go home and open your box and go, this isn't Cheerios, it's, Captain Crunch. That lesson alone shows you the importance of art.